Hello everyone and welcome to our Charity Digital webinar. I'm Sasha and I work in the marketing team at Charity Digital and I will be your host for today. I'm currently in the office today, so apologies if you hear any background noise or traffic. But I just want to start off by saying, let's face it, the past few years have been a bit of a whirlwind for our sector, but we've done a really amazing job at trying to grapple with whatever's been thrown our way. But as a result, we've had to make some very reactive decisions due to external circumstances, such as kind of whole workforces going remote and then accommodating to hybrid working too. But with things starting to sort of settle down a little bit, fingers crossed, it's a good time for us to reflect on our processes, especially our security. At Charity Digital, we've been doing a lot of work to raise awareness around the increasing threats our sector is facing. And today we're being joined by speakers Apurva and Priyo from Microsoft Tech for Social Impact to discuss 5 key steps we can take to improve our security. So before I hand over to Apurva, I just want to run through a few house rules. If one of our speakers' Wi-Fi suddenly goes, please just bear with us as we try and resolve the issue. For any questions, please use the Q&A section of the webinar. That's the sort of 2 little speech bubbles with the question marks in it. Yeah, we just want to kind of use that for questions and keep track of these, and then we can sort of ask them to the speakers at the end. You're also welcome to use this function to share any thoughts with us too. At the end of the webinar, once we're finished, we'll also email around a feedback form, which we'd really appreciate if you could fill that in afterwards. But that's enough from me now. I'll be able to sort of come back on at the end to sort of relay any questions to our speakers. But for now, Apurva, it's over to you.
All right. Well, there we go. Well, thank you, Sasha, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Like Sasha mentioned, my name is Apurva Chandra, and I am the Modern Workplace Lead for the Tech for Social Impact team at Microsoft. And I'm joined today by Priyo, who you'll hear from in a few minutes, and also joined behind the scenes with Courtney and Dan, who will be answering questions and piping up if there are any questions that Priyo or I can't answer later on. But to start off with, a part of what I do at Microsoft is talking to nonprofits about security. So I'm thrilled to be here and just giving you like an overall security landscape of the nonprofit sector and going through 5 specific steps to improve charity security. So we have a lot of material to go through, so I will just dive in. So, while security is a core piece of product development across Microsoft, here in Tech for Social Impact, we see security as a central part of our commitment to the nonprofit sector. We believe we have a responsibility to help nonprofits understand the risks and implement the solutions needed to preserve and protect the data and trust of their stakeholders. Cybercrime causes trillions of dollars in financial losses and operational impacts, and targeted attacks have risen during the pandemic. The 2021 Microsoft Digital Defense Report reveals that cybercriminals are getting more sophisticated as they have the resources, investment, and research to deploy well-informed attacks against organizations. But there is some good news, and that's that knowledge is power. More companies and governments are coming forward when they're victims, providing transparency and making clear that cybercrime is a real threat to security. This has encouraged organizations to prioritize security education for both IT and non-IT staff. And it helps. For example, we've seen a 50% year-over-year reduction in employee susceptibility to phishing after simulation. We also know that basic security hygiene protects against 98% of attacks. So enabling things like multi-factor authentication, applying least privilege access, keeping versions up to date, utilizing anti-malware, and knowing where your sensitive data is stored and who has access will help your organization prepare for and mitigate the majority of most threats. Now, knowing the risk posed to the nonprofit sector is a critical step in addressing it. There's some big numbers on this slide here. So we know that nonprofits and think tanks are the 2nd most common targets of nation state actors detected by Microsoft, receiving 31% of all notifications in the past year. We also know that many nonprofits store sensitive data, contact information, credit card and bank details, social security numbers, and other government ID. Some organizations, and you may be one of these, that even collect health and biometric information. Now, this data must be secure to protect the stakeholders who have entrusted organizations with their personal details. Nonprofits must maintain the integrity of their operations and confidence of the communities they work with, because as we know, the sector runs on trust. Yet, we know that more than 70% of nonprofits haven't done a vulnerability assessment, and that 80% of nonprofits don't have a cybersecurity strategy. Not only is it important to act, it's important to act now, especially when you consider that a breach can be as simple as one click. Now, some more big numbers on this slide, and it might surprise you that Microsoft is the largest security vendor in the world. We help secure more than 650,000 organizations, and countless users rely on our services every day. And we take this responsibility seriously. You know, being in the trenches for a number of high-profile recent attacks has enabled us to use the experience to collectively elevate our defenses for the benefit of our customers. Today, we track more than 40 active nation-state actors and over 140 threat groups representing 20 countries. Our broad Microsoft ecosystem ranges from Azure to Dynamics 365 to Xbox to Microsoft 365, and it gives us a wide view of the security landscape. And you can really see our signals at work. We process 24 trillion signals each day and use it to continuously help our customers and mitigate threats in real time via the cloud. And as a result, 32 billion email threats alone were blocked last year. And we'll dive deeper into all of these signals later on in the conversation. Now, as defenders ourselves, we understand the challenges that you face, starting with the complexity of the technology environment today. The blurring line between organizational and personal activities results in an overlapping web of technologies, many of which nonprofits may not own or manage outright. With so many devices, different user groups, and so much sensitive data, it is challenging for organizations to keep up with the sophistication of all of these threats. Let me build this slide out. So we're committed to help you grow your future, and that means we're constantly looking at where security is going and investing in that direction. This is illustrated by our track record of always being one of the first security vendors to enter new markets over the past few decades. Taking a comprehensive approach to security means we're constantly learning about the unmet needs of people and organizations we serve, and adapting to the latest social, economical, and security trends so that we can provide protection that you need when you need it most, or even to get ahead of the curve. Now, to illustrate this, I mean, we invested $5 billion in security R&D globally over the past 5 years, and we've previously announced that we're going to quadruple that to $20 billion over the next 5 years. And so we're excited to bring even more innovations to help protect our customers like you against the evolving threat landscape. And Priyo and I will get into that in a little bit more detail in the next few minutes here. So this will lay the groundwork for where we're going for the next part of this presentation. But our conversation with customers around the world have helped us identify 5 key security challenges that might be familiar to you. Now, the first one is protecting identity and endpoints for strong zero trust foundations. So among its 6 pillars, a zero trust security framework should start with securing the people and devices that they use to get work done. Now, both are increasingly important as we navigate a hybrid world where employees will work from anywhere across different business and personal devices. And we're here to ensure that you don't need to compromise between security and productivity. The second one that we have here is modernize security and defend against threats. Now, as we navigate the hybrid future that we're all slowly moving towards, in addition to facing more sophisticated threats and a more complex regulatory environment, security tools also need to evolve. Organizations need to stay ahead of attackers to end attacks before they happen and cause damage. And if an incident does occur, organizations need to have the tools to quickly verify impact and remediate. The third one that we have here is secure cloud infrastructure in and outside of Azure. So the infrastructure, data, and apps built and run in the cloud are the foundational building blocks for a modern business. No matter where you are in your cloud journey, you probably use some version of SaaS, IaaS, and PaaS. And now we know that more and more organizations are using a multi-cloud and/or a hybrid strategy to maximize business impact. But at the same time, this kind of strategy creates some security concerns. So organizations need a security solution that offers multi-cloud protection across every layer for a strong security posture. The fourth one that we have here is protect and govern sensitive data. Now, we all know that data is the lifeblood of any organization, and how business data is handled and processed becomes increasingly important as the amount of data is growing at unprecedented rate and leaving the corporate firewall in the hybrid world. Organizations need the tools to understand, identify, and classify their data, apply data loss prevention policies, and meet data compliance or regulatory requirements. Now, the last one that we have here is manage and investigate risk. So a comprehensive security approach is not just about defending external attacks, but also about addressing internal threats. Insider threats are on the rise. Sometimes they're intentional, oftentimes they're not, but impact from either can be very costly. Because it's difficult for organizations to even spot these insider threats, charities need tools that can detect which activities are most likely to pose real security threats. So that was my general overview on the security landscape. And so now I want to get into the title of this webinar, which is 5 Steps to Improve Charity Security. So the first one, and it all starts with gaining buy-in from leadership and your board. So to truly increase your focus on security, it's important to have leadership and your board members aligned with security as an organizational priority. To do this, find security champions inside the organization who can help you lead that conversation. And if your charity doesn't have a CIO or other technology leader, you can tap for this, don't worry. Whatever your role, you can champion security and start driving conversation around it. So let's start off with how do you gain buy-in and leadership from the board? So first, start by creating a summary of both the general and nonprofit specific security risks and challenges to share. Microsoft's has some great resources that can kick off this research, such as the Microsoft Digital Defense Report that I mentioned earlier. And coming to the table with information about what is happening in the sector is an easy way to start the conversation and get leadership on board with the importance of securing your data and information. Second, you can lead a Q&A session on security, including risks and concerns. So start with the basics, asking questions and providing clarification about what is a cyber attack, what is the threat landscape, and questions about the different kinds of attacks. Microsoft, you're probably not surprised at this point, but we also provide learning pathways, which we'll talk about shortly, and that can help jumpstart this step. Next, coordinate and track security issues regularly. So while communicating with internal stakeholders, the more we talk about threats to security, the more they'll be on top of mind for everyone in the organization to look out for. When it comes to security inside your charity, knowledge really is power. If your organization does in fact have a tech team, suggest organizing a special security task force to lead these sorts of discussions. Lastly, suggest that security is part of the board of directors' regular agenda. So security is essential to keeping a nonprofit organization healthy. For organizations that rely on trust as heavily as charities do, reputation is critical to retaining the confidence of donors, funders, and program participants. Protecting that trust is quite literally currency. So that was number 1. Number 2, establish a security plan. So security is more than just a tech issue. A new report from the Technology Affinity Group revealed that 85% of data breaches involved a human element, whether it was intentional or not. And it's sobering to think that a potentially devastating data breach can occur with just a single mouse click. Because every organization is only as strong as its weakest link, staff and volunteers need the education and skills to learn how to identify and respond to threats. This training requires security awareness and skills across your entire team. And we have some ways to help you get started, both foundational to our new security program for nonprofits announced in the fall. So by establishing a formal security plan, by creating a formal plan, as well as embedding a workplace culture of best practices and safe processes, You'll help your staff throughout your organization build and maintain trust with all constituents, including program participants, donors, and volunteers. Now, ensuring everyone is aware of this plan is especially important in today's workplace since employees are increasingly using their personal devices to work. Microsoft offers a free security assessment that I'm happy to answer questions about later. And this is a great place to start building your plan. The outcomes of this assessment, the assessment will help you understand what the highest risks are in your technology environment, what needs to be actioned on most urgently, and what the low-hanging fruit is that doesn't require any additional licensing, but adds immediate security value. The comprehensive reports are meant to provide actionable ways for you to improve your security score and help you meet cybersecurity requirements like managing endpoints, identity management, networking, infrastructure, and data vulnerability. And these assessments will also help you determine your cloud optimization opportunities to ensure that your configuration and architecture match the requirements of your organization. Now, let me build that out. Now, along with building security awareness throughout your team, consider scheduling regular security training for all employees throughout the year to ensure that they have the knowledge and tools to identify threats such as malware, phishing, and ransomware. Training should also show employees how to report suspected security incidents and update workers on specific looming threats. Consider making this training an onboarding requirement for new staff members and volunteers, as well as a refresher training for current employees. Now we have training listed out for both IT staff and IT administrators here, because we believe that training for those two different groups is fundamentally different. For your non-IT staff, we really feel like you should focus on the basics, on protecting yourself from online scams, working from home more securely, and just being safer over wireless connections. For IT admins, we have a ton of free training that helps admins figure out how to turn on specific security settings inside of either Microsoft services or non-Microsoft security services. And we also provide live security training that goes across time zones and across languages. So we really encourage all of you to take a look at these free trainings and encourage your staff to as well. Now, with that said, we're done with step 2 out of 5. And so for step 3, I'll bring in my colleague Priyo, who'll get into a little bit more details on how to create and document security policies and best practices.
Thank you, Apurva. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Priyo Lahiri. I'm a technical specialist for security compliance and identity here at Tech for Social Impact. And I'm going to spend the next 5 to 7 minutes talking about the security policies that you should create and the top things that you should take away from. So first of all, in case you haven't heard, we are moving into the world of zero trust architecture. What that essentially means is that we don't trust any of the application or authentication without explicitly verifying where it is coming from and if we know who that person is or that authentication mechanism is. Apurva covered a little bit about this, that the entire world is moving into the zero trust architecture. Here in the United States, it's as becoming a government mandate that if you are working with the US government, zero trust has to be there. And we recently published a blog on how to achieve this using various technologies. We'll be talking a little bit on Microsoft technologies here, but everything I mentioned here is possible for you to implement with or without Microsoft technology. Let's move on to the next slide, please. All right, so first of all, verify and secure every identity with a strong authentication. I still have a lot of customers and in general in Microsoft, we see that a ton of people have not enabled multi-factor authentication. I'll be talking about multi-factor a little bit more down the road. But essentially what we want you to do is secure access to all your applications with a single sign-on. When you integrate applications with something like Azure AD or whatever your IDP is, they are passing on tokens that is extremely hard for a bad actor to get in. Now, I'm going to use the word extremely hard because everything in security, as you probably know, is relative. We are trying to make it as difficult as possible for bad actors to get in, and that's true for any kind of security, whether cybersecurity or physical security implemented by law enforcement. Identities have to be verified using multi-factor authentication. It doesn't matter which multi-factor authentication you use, but you use multi-factor authentication. On that note, also make sure that if you're using Office 365, you enable modern authentication and disable basic authentication if you're enabling MFA or doing anything with something like security vaults. Disabling basic authentication is very important simply because that is your weak link. If you keep basic authentication active, someone who can't use modern authentication, some older phones, they will fall back into basic authentication to get in, and that's exactly how the bad actors get in as well. For accessing something in your corporate environment or accessing organizational data, use access with smart policies and risk assessments. From Microsoft standpoint, we have certain policies and templates already available, and we'll get into a little bit of diagram down the road. Any product you're using today, some of them provide smart control and access policies. We call it conditional access policies here in Microsoft, but other vendors have other names for the same thing. Essentially, use some kind of policies to find out if that user has been compromised or if the user is trying to access from a completely different place in the world. For example, Purva is based out of West Coast in Washington, in US, and if we see his authentication originating from somewhere around the world and he has not traveled, we know there is something wrong. So the system can detect it and prevent that malicious actor from logging in as a Purva. And finally, for your administrators, enforce least privilege access with very strong governance. The governance model is very boring, but it's also very important. You have to enforce privileged access management. That's a term we use in Microsoft, but other vendors have other terms. The whole point is, if you're a global admin, you shouldn't be logging on with a global admin access to Office 365 or any of your resources all the time. We used to do this back in the day. If you were a domain admin, you will never log in as a domain admin to your domain controller, right? You will log in as a normal user who doesn't have any rights, do a run as, be a global domain admin, do your work, and get out of there. That's exactly what privileged access management is. In the cloud world, you just use it a little differently. Let's move on to the next slide, Purva. All right, let's talk a little bit about single sign-on applications. We are doing it with Azure Active Directory, but any other IDP provider can do similar stuff. All your HR systems, your external users, be it on Azure AD, Google, Hotmail, SAML providers can integrate directly with Azure AD. The benefit is, as a user, when you sign into Azure AD, we can use the threat intel on Azure AD that the Purva mentioned, that 24 trillion signals that we analyze. We can use that intel to secure that connection and then give you access to other SaaS applications that might be Microsoft, might be non-Microsoft. For example, Salesforce, Workday, Zoom, AWS, Google Cloud. We recently did Cloud for Defender for Google Cloud as well. So anything you have, doesn't matter what that application is, if it is not listed as a single sign-on provider, you can still use SAML as long as the other application use SAML and FedAuth to integrate that with Azure AD or your IDP provider. For your on-prem application, we have Azure AD App Proxy. Other vendors have similar products, where essentially if you have an application that is running your on-prem, which has not been updated to receive a claim or understand a claim, you can, in about 15 minutes, you can protect that application and create a single sign-on with Azure AD, so that now everything that is your users are accessing, the authentication and authorization part, comes via Azure AD. Let's move on to the next slide. Identity and multi-factor. So multi-factor, the research we did, it prevents 99.9% of identity attacks, period. That's the best thing you can do. In fact, today we're going to spend an hour with you. If you don't listen to a word we say, And there's the one thing that key takeaway from this is enable multi-factor for everyone. There would be no exceptions whatsoever. If you want to use text, you could. The best way to do it is either with Windows Hello, Microsoft Authenticator. There are other authenticators like Google Authenticator, LastPass Authenticator, FIDO2 security key, or biometrics. This is your first step of going to passwordless, and that's down the road. You can enable it today if you wanted to. It's not a switch that you can turn on, so there are some other planning factors that need discussion that needs to be had. But I can verify and I can tell you today that there's no bad actor in the world can steal my password, my Microsoft password, because I don't have one. So when I don't have one in my personal Outlook, in my Xbox and my Microsoft account, I don't have a password. So if I want to log into hotmail.com, it sends me a push notification on my phone, and I approve it, and it shows a map and where the origination is coming from. Then I have to type in a number to match to the screen. You might think it's a lot of effort. It's a whole lot better than typing in the same password, which is password1, that people revert back to, because as a human being, you can't remember 50 different passwords of 50 different websites. So you end up reutilizing your password between your bank, Facebook, Twitter, and your work account. So we need to get out of that. Passwordless is the best way to do that. If you're interested in a passwordless journey, I'm happy to discuss it one-on-one with you. Let's move on to the next slide. So access with smart policies and risk assessments. This is how the Microsoft world works. Other vendors have their similar methodology, but our idea is that everything that happens, everything that you access as a user or as an app should go through a decision mechanism driven by AI engine. So let's say on the left-hand side, you are coming in from Azure AD, MSA, it's a Microsoft account, Google ID. You're coming in from Android, iOS, macOS, iPadOS, doesn't matter which device. You're coming in from a geolocation, a corporate network, a browser app, or client apps. Everything gets through that 24 trillion signal. Then there are other personas like partners, your donors that have access to the same information. So the decision is being made depend on whether Apurva is accessing the Microsoft resource from Washington, or is it originating from somewhere around the world? If it is originating from somewhere around the world, it is possible that Apurva traveled, right? So we will enforce MFA and ask Apurva to sign in using MFA so that we know it's the right person and not a bad actor who stole his password. Well, he's probably passwordless, but you get the point. And then we can do enforcement like allow or block access, do limited access. I can configure in a way that if a user is trying to download sensitive data, they cannot download and only view it inside the browser, any browser. Or if he chooses to download, we will automatically encrypt that with information protection. We can also do things like force password reset or block legacy authentication while accessing any of the resources on the right-hand side. Right, let's move on to the next slide. The privileged access management, again, this is about the administrators, whoever has administrative capabilities on that, needs to at least have some kind of policies in place that says they don't log in as their super user account everywhere. And they should only have access, the privileged access, when they need it. In the IT world, we call it JIT, just-in-time access. Just-in-time is not new. It has been there since Windows NT days, honestly. Everything an administrator does is captured in an audit report for compliance reasons. So this is also helps us in getting rid of the scenario where there could be a rogue admin doing something bad on your network. Everything is logged, everything is audited, something to keep in mind, but definitely have some kind of least privilege access enabled in your cloud. Doesn't matter what cloud you're using. With that, I'm going to stop talking. Happy to answer any questions you might have. Honestly, I can talk about this all day, but in the interest of time, we'll hand this back over to Apurva.
All right, I think I'm back. So yeah, I mean, like Priya mentioned, yeah, I am passwordless, and I feel like one of the best parts about that is not having to reset my password, you know, every 60 days, 90 days, and going back and doing that whole jazz. So So yeah, I'm passwordless and haven't looked back, but you know, to get back into what we were talking about, you know, the five tips. You know, we're at step number 4. So at this point, we've gotten board buy-in, we've generated awareness and built skills within our workforce, and we've set in place the right security policies. So now it's time to choose the right technology to use to empower our workforce. So like most organizations, charities are going through a fundamental change in the way their staff and volunteers work. Hybrid and remote work, initially forced by the pandemic, are growing in popularity, and your employers and donors alike are now increasingly reliant on digital technology. And so due to this shift, security requirements need to shift as well. Now, this shift in work has led people to increasingly work in the cloud and on mobile apps. People work using phones, tablets, and browsers, as well as traditional PCs. And visibility and control over the apps people use at work require security solutions built for this new environment. And to ask what this means for security. So you also must consider device proliferation, since IT personnel will spend more time managing and securing these connected network devices. Technology designed for working in the office might not be as effective in securing hybrid or remote work sites. So insecurity should not get in the way of employee productivity or privacy. So in the next few minutes, I'll walk through what to think about as you're selecting tech tools that make work smarter, not harder. And it's important to find an integrated solution that combines productivity and collaboration capabilities with security that helps your organizational data and donor structure without disrupting the flow of work. All right. So according to a 2021 Gartner report, 71% of HR leaders are more concerned about employee collaboration this year than they were before the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, when employees are in different locations, spontaneous teamwork is more challenging. That means you need to create collaboration opportunities more intentionally. Thankfully, technology can provide employees more options for collaboration, and the results are striking. The Gartner report I mentioned before also notes that teams of knowledge workers who collaborate intentionally are nearly 3 times more likely to achieve high team innovation than teams that do not use an intentional approach. So what can you do with technology to help your team get on the same page and foster collaboration? Well, the first thing is starting by assessing your current technology. So do employees have access to the tools environment they need to thrive when collaborating both remotely and in person? Can they effectively engage in mixed mode collaboration where some people meet in person and other people's are remote? We know that this is becoming more and more common as organizations get back to partial in-office work. Ask employees what they need to be prepared to invest where there are gaps. Like, do you have tools for one-on-one or group chat? Is there a place to host online meetings? Now, with increasing pressure to move faster and keep up with need, teamwork within your organization is always a necessity. Unfortunately, everyone can't be available at all times, and catching up can be hard if people are working on different tools. Now, imagine a group chat on a standalone program that only one team uses. Members on the extended team aren't available and aren't logged into that particular tool. To bring them up to speed, participants might have to copy and paste the chat into an email or send a message telling them to log in and read the results. It's likely that without the full context, the communication will be confusing, reducing the potential for sharing ideas and moving ideas forward efficiently. So that's why we recommend one toolkit of standardized apps to be used across the whole team that still supports different work styles. Now, for example, like with unified presence information in Microsoft Teams, which we're all on right now, you always know the availability of other team members. They can easily schedule meetings in advance or spontaneously. When some teammates are offline, they get alerted to the activity they've missed and can catch up later by reading the chat history. The ability to record meetings and share files from a centralized location within Teams means people never have to miss out on project progress. And Teams lets you easily control permissions. Only those within your teams have access to chat history and files, keeping valuable information in the right hands. We'll build this out. So in a team-oriented organization, files and documents aren't static. They're always being updated with new information and ideas. If you're storing files in a location that's disconnected from your teamwork environment, like another application or a personal drive, it could result in version control and access issues. So not only do people need access to documents from any device, they also need the ability to work on them together in real time, whether they're all in the same office or half a world away. Now, what we believe the solution is to save time and frustrations with easier file access and co-working. So when file storage and sharing is integrated with the collaboration tools people use every day, information becomes a living resource that adapts with changing needs. With everything in one place, staff can quickly find what they need using intuitive search capabilities. So what I love about using Microsoft 365, including Teams, is that you can eliminate the need to track versions across email threads and meeting sessions. Everything's in one place and up to date. Real-time co-authoring is built in through SharePoint. There's no need to check out files or worry if someone else has a file open. Changes are merged in real time and the latest version is always available for everyone to work on. You know, for example, I mean, this presentation right here, I mean, Courtney, Priyo, Dan, and I were all working on it together for the past couple of days, and just can't imagine, I kind of forget what it was like, you know, 10 years ago if we would have worked on something similar. So your team will thank you for reducing version control and access issues, and it's something that you'll see the immediate results from. And if you choose standalone applications to meet your collaboration needs, it's unlikely to meet all of your work styles and preferences. This increases the risk of staff bringing in apps that they use in their personal lives, apps that are typically unauthorized by IT. So not only is your data then at risk because it lives outside of IT's protection, but it also means that you can't get IT support when you need it. Managing collaboration and productivity apps within a single platform definitely helps keeps your team secure. Obviously, like here at Microsoft, we encourage the use of Teams, but we know that there are many other vendors out there that provide solutions that'll help meet your nonprofit's needs. Now, the last thing that we have here is that, you know, regardless of where you're working these days, multiple devices are needed to get work done, from laptops to desktops, mobile devices, and meeting room devices. So it's critical to have a seamless and secure experience for virtual collaboration and conversations, file sharing, data storage, and more. And it's never been more critical to provide a seamless experience across devices. Consider these questions to help you evaluate your employee experience. Can they switch from laptop to tablet to smartphone while working on the same document and have confidence they're still seeing the latest version of their work? Can they be sure everyone on their team will receive a critical document ahead of a key deadline? Can they work offline and know that their emails, calendar, and documents will sync properly when they reconnect? Do they have access to devices that are designed well for the productivity tools on your shortlist? And especially important for nonprofits, do your solutions allow you to work both online and offline using any device, so staff and volunteers are not slowed down by poor connectivity? I know that's a long list of questions to reflect on, but as the need to work from any place on any device expands, so too do the security questions that you need to ask. So now that we've gone through 4 steps, the very last one that we have here is that, you know, by working closely with a partner organization that specializes in security strategies and solutions, you can focus on your mission while getting ahead of today's complex threat landscape. Our partners make it their goal to help accelerate your work. We have select partners ready to help you get started using the security program for nonprofits. And like I mentioned before, Microsoft is committed to helping nonprofits succeed by providing training, resources, and discounts. Our end-to-end security approach is built for today's world of hybrid clouds, apps, data, and devices. Microsoft offers a partner ecosystem with industry-specific solutions to help address your most urgent business and technology challenges. So for more information, I encourage all of you to go to www.microsoft.com/nonprofits. So just to put all 5 steps back on one single slide in case you missed them. So first step, getting buy-in from your board. Second, building security awareness among your staff and your team. Third, like Priyo mentioned, creating document security policies and best practices. Then after you've done all of that, then you choose and use the technology design for the way people work. And then lastly, find an expert partner that'll help you just make all of your planning a reality. So those are the 5 steps. What I want to leave you with in terms of resources before we jump into Q&A is just a couple of resources that I already alluded to in the previous part of the presentation. So encourage you all to register as a nonprofit on the Microsoft portal. We have a lot of free resources that you all can take advantage of. So for example, we have a $3,500 annual credit for Azure. We have 10 free seats of a license called Microsoft 365 Business Premium that includes Teams and includes a lot of the security functionality that we talked about today, as well as some voice functionality. And we provide a 74% discount on most Microsoft 365 products. So if you haven't already, I definitely encourage you all to register as a nonprofit on our portal. The second thing I wanted to mention was the security program for nonprofits. You heard me talk about that a couple of times during the presentation today. It involves a few different elements. One element is a program called Account Guard. So this is an absolutely free service where you enter in your domain and we enter it into a threat monitoring tool. And so we add it to our database. We're constantly monitoring these domains to ensure that there aren't any nation state attacks. If there is one, we'll notify you and we can work with you to take action. But it's a super simple thing just to add your domain to this, so it's part of our advanced threat monitoring solution. The second thing I mentioned, security assessments. So absolutely free security assessment. They're provided by vendors that we work with. You go in, go through the security assessment, like the end report will show you what all of your security vulnerabilities are, and you can work with the partner to figure out how best to address those. On top of that, we also have deployment assistance and thought leadership and training resources available that provide this wraparound service for our security program. So with that, I think that we are ready for Q&A.
Amazing. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much, Peva and Priyo. That was a really interesting session, and I hope lots of people got a lot from that. So I think probably the best thing we can do is really to dive into some of the questions that we've gotten. So we have had a couple of questions, such as whether the slides and the recording will be available. Just to say that yes, these will be available in about 1 week's time. So do not worry about that. You'll get the slides, recording, and any sort of resources mentioned as well. Then in terms of, we also have a question from Karen, which was where would we find the free security assessment, and Courtney's kindly put a link in there too for anyone who's interested. But I do have a question from Maria, which was, how would you persuade a charity that thinks it is too small to be concerned with having a security plan? So I'll put that open to any of you guys. Anyone who feels they can answer that one, feel free to unmute yourselves.
I'm gonna let if Priyo's willing, I'm gonna let him jump in first, Priyo or Dan. I can provide some additional detail if they can get started on that, putting them on the spot here.
Priyo, I think you might be muted.
Oh,
always the fun thing, isn't it?
Yes. you would think I'll know about that after 2 years working from home, but here we are. Is that question about the security assessment? Sorry, I was reading the questions in the chat window.
Yeah, no worries. So the question was, how would you persuade a charity that thinks it is too small to be concerned with having a security plan?
Great question. So we have to understand the implications of not having a plan to begin in the first place. So I have fairly high profile and fairly small charities who has been hacked. And there are regulations and policies around place where you have to, kind of publish in your website or let the government know that there has been a bad actor in your network that has stolen credit card data or personal information. How does that translate to the donor base? These are the questions we normally ask. If I have my credit card information saved in one of the charities, and I have many, and if I hear that the credit card information has been stolen, I'll be very wary of putting my credit card back again over in there. So the cost of not doing anything is far more. It's difficult for you to position that to your board simply because unless things go wrong, no one cares about security. And by the time it goes wrong, it's too late.
Yeah, thank you for that one. Anybody else want to add anything to that answer?
I guess the only thing I would add is, I mean, we have, like I mentioned, a bunch of tools that we have, and we've really tried to make it as simple as possible to get started, right? For small organizations, the cost of implementing these tools in terms of licenses, like I mentioned before, we provide a lot of free licenses, and other vendors do as well. So I don't want to make this completely Microsoft centric, but nonprofits have access to a lot of free tools, a lot of heavy discounts. So in terms of the products, it's becoming more and more accessible as more security vendors understand how big of a threat this is for nonprofits of all sizes. So while putting the plan together will take some of your time, I hope folks here will understand that the process of procuring the technology and the policies that Priyo outlined, they're getting easier and easier as everyone's becoming more and more aware of the security threat. So I don't want people to feel discouraged or threatened or feel like it's an overwhelming amount of work to put these policies in place, because it's getting simpler and simpler.
Yeah, just to add to that, and I see another question from Debbie that says, advice for small charity with one employee that is responsible for device security as well as network security as well as many other things, right? You will see that if you have played around with a little bit of our email security product, the Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Office 365 or Defender for Endpoint, we have come up with templates that you can readily implement. It's like in the back good old days, we had templates for hardening servers. It's exactly the same thing, but for the cloud world, which you can take a template, apply it, and that will make you as secure as you can be. And then from there on, you start opening up stuff. For example, like we do a firewall configuration. So if you are a one-person, a one-man show, and you want to make your emails and your other users as secure as you can, use those templates. Start with those templates. Takes a few seconds to implement it, but do understand that if you enforce a strict template, it will cut down on what the users can and cannot do. So as long as you can understand them, all those templates will make your life a whole lot easier.
Great, thank you for that. Yeah, and I can tell that we obviously have a few sort of small charities here, so I thought it'd be worth just mentioning one of the comments in the Q&A as well from Jerry, who said, "Hi Maria, I would advise them to speak to a small charity like ours." So kind of speaking to other charities who have probably experienced a similar thing. Essentially speaking to small charities that had a major data breach. We wished we had not been so switched off to the threat previously. We have, however, now made the charity much more secure and have learnt from our mistakes. So I just thought that was quite an interesting one to sort of bring there. So in terms of other sort of questions, and I know that if you guys can sort of see in the Q&A that Dan's also sort of popped some comments in there too. Mira did ask, is there a budget? Any budget or funding organisations that charities can apply for to get support in implementing the basics, essentially. So unless you guys have any other sort of answers there, then I think we can probably leave it to what's being popped in by Dan.
Yeah, one thing that I would mention is for organizations over 150 users, there is Microsoft Fast Track that you can engage, where they can help guide that process of deployment as well. But even if you're under that count, you're as small as one user, security threats don't discriminate. A compromised password will end up on a, list that's being sold somewhere, whether you're one user or 10,000 users. We do have these self-service materials to help walk you through that process of onboarding, and just make sure that we start with the fundamentals, things like locking down or eliminating the password, things like MFA. that alone can mitigate the vast majority of threats within the organization.
Amazing, thank you for that. So there is just one anonymous attendee just getting some clarification on what was the name of the product that charities can use to add their domain name to.
Yeah, so that's called Account Guard, and I think that I don't know if we put that into the chat, but there's a link directly to how you can take part in the Account Guard program. The first thing that you do need to do is register as a nonprofit with Microsoft, and so that'll get validated, and that typically takes between, I would say, 2 days to 4 days to get validated. And once you're validated, then you just sign up for the Account Guard program, and that's that.
Amazing, thank you so much. And yes, our person on the back of house, Zoe, has popped in the name of that, and Courtney's also put a link in, so awesome. Just feel free to have a look at that on the chat. So that's great. So we have another question here saying, hi, what would you recommend as a device management system that is cheap but effective for charities? We would like a single system that could potentially have location labels, USB port control, and so on.
Intune can do all of those things.
Yeah.
Would it be cheap? I don't know. That depends. But any kind of device management software is gonna cost something, simply because it's the way we manage devices is very different from how we did 2 years ago, right? If you think about it, your perimeter network and your firewall doesn't exist or doesn't matter anymore. I am in US, I have some of my colleagues in Europe and Australia and all over the world. They are working from home, just like your users are working from home, which means I am not connected to a Microsoft firewall so that they can validate. So the entire world is your perimeter network, which is scary, right? And that's where some kind of device management software come into play, like Intune from us. There are other players in the market. I don't know how much they cost, but I know Intune can do everything that you just mentioned.
Great, fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, one more point there. You know, if you are a smaller nonprofit and you're thinking, oh no, how do I get into this? That's where the point that Apurva made, that we have these donation licenses. If you look at things like Microsoft 365 Business Premium, where there are a handful of donation licenses available, that includes the endpoint management and identity services that Priyo has touched upon today. So that's a great starting point to then where you can secure at least your most critical users, but it also gives you that foundation to expand out to make sure that your security posture is equal across the board.
Amazing, thank you. So we've got a question here. I'm just going into some of the newer questions that have been coming in throughout the Q&A. So we had a question from Cheryl who said, do you have tips to monitor your outsourced IT support company to ensure that we as a charity are secure? A tricky one.
It is. I'm going to look to you again, Priyo. Do you have any ideas on outsourced IT? I mean, I feel like it's the same. It's the same thing that we're talking about, right?
Yeah, there are companies that now provide security as a service. I know of a handful of few, but they're very, very expensive. So if you're looking at a software doing the work for you, then the AI engine is your best friend. If you really want another company like MSSP to run the security business on your end, I can provide some names in that area which do that probably, but they're all going to be very expensive.
Yeah, and I guess that's another way of saying you might want to look into doing this on your own, like using the stuff that Priyo and I have been talking about during the presentation. Like it's not going to be cheap. It's probably worth the investment to take a look at the policies that Priyo outlined, take a look at our security assessment, and really work with the partner to help you understand how can you do this yourself. You know, we don't really think of it as a best practice to outsource your security, outsource like your security posturing and securing your threats. It is something that you should try to internalize as much as possible. But Priyo, you can follow up with these organizations that can help you get started.
And keep in mind, even if you hire another security vendor to run your security show, you would still need to pay for the licenses of whoever you choose, whether it's Microsoft or there's so many vendors out there. So you are essentially hiring a muscle power to tell you that, hey, you have been breached and let me click this button for you. There are places where you would need a separate MSSP to do all your work, and that is perfectly fine. But I would say start from the AI, let the AI help you before we expand into that. But feel free to reach out and we can get you a list of the providers in your area.
Fantastic, thank you. So we have a question from either Rachel or Raquel. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. But essentially they are saying, not really a question, but I have a lot of staff in my charity who are self-proclaimed technophobes. Sometimes I think the fear of breaking something is worse than the fear of a data breach. And I feel like this is a huge culture change needed. I think this is quite an interesting sort of conversation really to be had about the culture. I know, having sort of spoken to other people from smaller charities as well, there's a feeling of, you don't want to say that there might have been a breach because you're worried that perhaps leadership teams might get angry at you, might kind of punish you for perhaps even causing one, for example. I think it might be quite interesting to see what your perspectives are on the culture that we currently have now, and what can especially leadership teams take to sort of help reduce that stigma, I suppose.
Yeah, I can start with that. And Priya, if you have anything you could add on to it. Like, I think it goes back to the first thing that we mentioned, which is getting board buy-in. Because I think along with getting board buy-in and like getting the board's buy-in to understand like how big of a threat security is, it's not just about investing in security and like making it a priority. It's also creating a culture with which like people are encouraged to bring up security breaches and encouraged to have a zero trust mentality, encouraged to just bring it up even if it is nothing. And I think that also leads into the second step that we had, which was around training. So I mean, the training that we have is like, we really tried to find the simplest training, the most approachable training for end users to understand just what does a phishing attempt look like how do you avoid malware, like how do you deal with multi-factor authentication. So I mean, I think it does really start with those first two things, which is just making sure that the board is bought in, you have a culture of being able to report and talk about it more freely. And I feel like more often than not, that does start at the top, getting leadership buy-in. And second thing was training, making sure people understand what the threats look like. And our third step even was getting those policies in place so that it's actually pretty obvious when there is something that comes up. You set up these policies in place so that there's only a few ways in which you can get attacked, and in those ways you're immediately alerted. So I really do feel like it starts with going through these 5 steps, but I know we only have a minute or 2 left, so Priya, I'll let you add on if there's anything else.
No, I think you covered it all. It's a difficult process. As human beings, we are resistant to changes.
Yeah.
And normal end users don't like IT anyway.
Yeah.
So it's all the more difficult, but we're doing it it's like a parenting, they don't like you, but you are doing it for the right reasons.
Amazing. Well, I think that was quite an interesting sort of one to leave off with, because I know that we've only got 1 minute left. But please do, if you're attending, and you can have a look at some of those questions there. Dan and Courtney have been sort of behind the scenes popping in some really helpful resources and links and answers. So feel free to kind of open those up, make sure you save those tabs. We'll also probably save those ourselves so that we can pop it on the resources part of the website and the webinar page. But for now, thank you so much to Apurva, Priyo, Dan and Courtney for this really insightful session. I hope that everyone has taken away a lot with them today and a lot to think about going forward. So for now, I'm going to say goodbye. After this webinar, we will be sending over a feedback form. Again, if you could please fill that in, that would be amazing, because it helps us understand how we can improve and make sure that we provide webinars that are really helpful for the sector. So thank you so much again. And yeah, we'll see you in 2 weeks for our next webinar. Thanks so much and bye.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, I wasn't sure if this is where we were supposed to join.
This was all I saw with the join button, so I said, sure, let's join. So maybe you and I talking at the end of a webinar script, who knows?
Well, I see there are 7 attendees now, so I'm confused.
Oh, interesting. Let's see.
Well, I see that it's okay. They're all invited.
It's
so
all us. Yeah.
Okay, so I can just request them all to join, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is what I should be doing, but I just pressed the button for everyone.
Let's see what happens.
Let's see what happens. We got Dan. Okay.
Perfect.
Are we? So I don't know. Is this what we were hoping for?
Oh yeah, it looks like Zoe's on now as well.
Okay.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Oh, I'm confused now because I thought I was on a different
Oh,
thing.
maybe. I don't know. I'm pretty sure it's just the group here. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, because I got confused because I thought I couldn't kick people out because of the, there's a lag on Teams. when people join live, but actually I think we're fine to talk here because the kind of live event has been put on pause, and then people that need to finish off, they can finish it off, but there's nothing live, so I think it's fine.
Okay.
And,
Cool.
and
There
now
is a
Sasha's
little
there.
live button in the corner, just so you know, like before it said pre-live and now it says live, at least in the corner of my screen.
Yeah. Did you get the invite that I sent for the debrief meeting?
I did not.
Oh. I just set up a meeting and I added you all to it, but that's so that we could join on a different call. Oh, how about this? Wait. Can you see the link I'm about to post in the chat? There. Maybe if we all join this call, just to be on the safe side.
Yep.
Perfect.
Yep.
Will do.
All right.
Bye.